Dr. David Shoemaker is a person who really needs no introduction in the Thelemic community. His work as an author, teacher, academic, organizer, leader, and friend has touched the lives of so many people. He is such a radiant individual, and thanks to him and Weiser, I get to interview him today with regards to his new book, The Way of the Will, Thelema in Action. I'm excited to talk to him not only about this book and as well the practice of Thelema. Full disclosure, Weiser did send me a copy of this book, but honestly, I would have bought it anyway. Thank you so much, David, for being here. I think most people listening and watching today know who you are, but for the uninitiated, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Lynn. It's great to be here. I am a clinical psychologist by profession, but I've, for many years, I guess it's 31 now, been exploring Thelema from any angle I could find, but largely through initiatory organizations and kind of gaining gradually experience with teaching and supervising initiates and doing my own private magical meditative work. And at this point, I'm administering the Temple of the Silver Star, which is a magical order that focuses on the full range of techniques and tools of magic, the Thelemic order. Also, longtime affiliate of the AA and the OTO. So I've kind of been inhabiting a lot of these organizational and magical spaces for a while now, and just it was time for a new book and time to collect some more ideas, and so that's the most recent development, of course.
Wonderful. So, The Way of the Will, Thelema in Action is a follow-up to your other book, Living Thelema. Would you call this book a sequel to Living Thelema or something else? And does the reader have to read Living Thelema first before reading this one?
That's a great question. I don't see it as a sequel in the sense that it's sort of a pick up exactly where that one left off or something. And Living Thelema's got a lot of different topics in it anyway. What I would say is that Living Thelema was probably more foundational in terms of its content. So if someone is brand new to exploring Thelema, they'll probably want to go to Living Thelema first, just because it has a discussion of the foundational concepts like true will and the holy guardian angel, and how to get started with basic daily pentagram rituals and other daily practices like that. So if you're brand new to the area, I would send people to Living Thelema first. But both books are, I think, pretty good for beginners and more advanced students. But The Way of the Will has a discussion of some of the more advanced meditative techniques that Crowley discusses, but you don't see talked about as often. So there's a section on that that's a little bit more advanced if someone had not done any basic magical practices. And but the whole first section of the new book includes some material on Qabbalistic psychology and a lot of discussion of everyday topics that impact everybody, like how to stay creative and how to deal with ordeals in life and things like that, that are informed by the core concepts of the Thelemic tradition. How do you bring those to bear on life stuff, So that applies to everybody. So a complete beginner would probably, hopefully, get something out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if someone's listening to this and hasn't gotten into either of these books, go ahead and buy both of them because they do have different materials so you don't miss out.
I'm okay with that.
So I would like to bring up this idea of Thelema being a living tradition. It's clear from your books, Living Thelema, The Way of the Will, but also from your podcast episodes of Living Thelema, that Thelema did not end with Crowley. It's a living, breathing thing that continues to evolve and be expressed through its practitioners. Part of the beauty of people like yourself picking up that mantle is we do get new things and new understanding. In your journey, what are some of the highlights of new things and ideas you've seen explored within the Thelemic context?
Mm. Well, one thing that I think is inevitable is, across 30 years of living within the Thelemic world, and including organizational structures and outside of organizational structures, is just the open discussion about Thelema in the world. So as we culturally move through different phases of our lives and together, and see shifts in culture, what does Thelema bring to that? An open discussion about that. That keeps it alive. This isn't about just being archaeologists of what we were supposed to do based on 120 years ago. It's what do we do in our everyday lives now based on what everyday life is like, so the daily challenge of bringing a Thelemic mindset and approach to everything we experience is a big part of what keeps the tradition alive. Also, I think Thelemites in general are pretty good about not blindly following tradition. There's a little tiny bit of questioning authority that's built into us, I think, and that serves to keep something alive too. There's always a little bit of active tension about the old way and the new way, to oversimplify, and I think ultimately that's a good thing because it keeps things from getting calcified. In my personal work, I have observed orders like Temple of the Silver Star that have kind of continued the process of integrating other traditions into a mystery school in terms of what it can teach. A magical initiatory organization doesn't have to only rely on the source Golden Dawn materials or the source Crowley materials, but also, other writers and thinkers across the 20th and now 21st century, like Carl Jung, contributing a lot of depths of psychology understanding to our work, advances in science. The very interesting work of Paul Foster Case flows into the tradition in terms of his use of light and sound and things like that. So just the rivers coming together, keep it alive too.
Yeah, I love how you talk about it as rivers coming together. I think that's really
Mm-hmm.
nice.
Yeah, yeah. Makes it bigger and wider.
Yeah, and I think that's something I love seeing coming out from practitioners and a lot of the authors, writers, creators. It really inspires my own personal work, and I think a lot of people can relate to that as well. So,
Mm-hmm.
whether it comes from a book, from a podcast, there's
Mm-hmm.
wonderful nuggets of inspiration for creativity out there to be gained.
Right, right. It's a good time to be alive in that sense. Lots of
Yeah,
resources.
absolutely. So true. So, within this book, you do not shy away from giving practical advice for people looking to join Thelemic organizations, but also advice for people looking to do the work by themselves. For anyone approaching the AA work by themselves, I think the ordeals of the grades of the AA chapter is incredibly helpful.
Mm.
What is some advice you would give someone interested in doing the work by themselves?
Another great question. And of course, a lot of my work has been within organizations, so it's something I do think about. Like, what are we bringing to the picture for a practitioner that is different from what they might be doing on their own? So pros and cons. Some of the pros of working in a tradition or an organization are the organizational memory, the livingness of the community. But not everyone wants or needs that. So a solitary practitioner probably needs more inherent self-discipline to get very far with the work because they're not turning in diaries to someone. They're not, uh, having timelines for finishing up work or things like that. So if someone's working completely solitary, like not even with one teacher, as in the AA tradition, um, the self-discipline becomes of more paramount importance. A certain self-awareness that the person's not going to get feedback from others about how am I doing on this task, how am I doing in life in general. So they've got to be their own therapist, their own teacher, their own life coach, their own magical coach, and that's a greater challenge without context for it. So how does one set the benchmarks for one's own practice and attainments in a vacuum? So I'm not saying it's impossible, but certainly people attain without joining groups all the time. But it is a different kind of challenge for sure.
Yeah, definitely. That's a lot of hats to wear. And something I think about and something I've seen people experience, especially people who are brand new, is burnout. And it seems
Mm,
like, especially if it's something you're doing on your own, you're trying to race through it at an
right.
unmanageable pace, you're going to burn out. So, something to keep in mind also.
Yeah, and I've seen that way too often. And one of the unique or interesting things about that is that the intention is to go faster, and it ends up being slower. So there's this illusion of I'll dive into the deep end, I'll pick up some advanced practices right away. Yeah, I've done the pentagram ritual for a week, but let's do some Goei shake, and it's the intention again is I just want to push through, and there's force and power and passion there, and that's great. But sometimes what ends up as an attempt to accelerate the process ends up slowing it down because the burnout, or because um, for some people the particular kinds of choices they're making about things they're doing may function psychologically as an imbalancing influence. They've done too much of this, but they don't know how to balance it out because they're not very experienced yet. In terms of they've invoked this energy, but they don't have a nuanced inner experience of all the ways to deal with that because they're new to it. So there is a lot of merit to willfully, intentionally slowing it down, getting the basics first, knowing how to relax in your body, knowing how to even know if you've done something correctly to the energy field around you through training and experience, and that's the only way to learn that. So yeah, that's a little soapbox. I'm going too fast.
Yeah, wonderful. That's so valuable. I think a lot of people need to hear that. And I want to take this conversation into something a little bit more personal because as I was going through the book, I was like, wow, this chapter, I all about finding a teacher and finding a
Mm,
school. I was like, wow, I need to bring this up because I think a lot of people need to hear this. So I
mm,
desperately wish I had this chapter and had read it when I was young and dumb and first starting out. I had to learn the lesson of exercising caution and my due diligence the hard way. And I
mm,
wish everyone doesn't have to learn the hard way. So I was very
yeah,
blessed to eventually find my way to good people, including yourself and the OTO and so on. But not everyone is so lucky. What are
yeah.
some of the biggest mistakes you have seen in people making choices when choosing a teacher or a school, and how can they avoid them?
Well, as I said earlier, one of the great things about being alive now is all the resources. You've got 1,000 choices of people claiming to be magical teachers online, and so some of them will be probably good, but the downside is that it's possible for someone to set themselves up as a teacher or label it as a school of instruction or something with absolutely no background other than them deciding to do it, and so some kind of vetting is really important. And as you noted, it is sometimes hard to know how to do that. So this chapter and the materials in it are designed to give some clues and tips on that. One thing to look for is if they're claiming to teach a tradition, have they been trained in the tradition? Which seems self-evident, but it's amazing how many, there's some fairly prominent schools, magical schools online these days that I know are run by people who did not get instruction in the things they're claiming to teach. And one of the principles of AA, one of the principles of um, scientific illuminism, is that we are taught by those who have done the work they are teaching. And therefore, we have some assurance that they are competent at it and know what to look for and have learned the pitfalls of it. So if you're looking for a tradition, and not everyone has to find a instruction within some sort of existing tradition, but if you're looking for that, make sure that your prospective teacher has actually come out of that tradition and has had their own training in it. It's not always the most polite thing to do right off the bat, talking to someone to say, well, who is your teacher? And, um, but at some point, if someone's presenting themselves as a competent carrier of a tradition, they ought to be okay with saying where they came from and what their sort of initiatory lineage is or whatever, however you want to call it. So that's one thing. Watch for tradition and watch for the nuances of what it means to carry a tradition and watch for their own training. It certainly shouldn't. You should never pursue a teacher or a school if you feel personally uncomfortable with them. This is not the kind of thing in life where it's okay to just be totally freaked out by the person, you know.
Hmm.
Those inner antenna that tell you, I wouldn't want this person in my home, you know. You don't want them giving you instruction. You don't want to hand them power implicitly or explicitly to tell you what is right for you, or you're doing this wrong, you need to change in this way, if you don't even trust them on a basic human level. So that kind of vetting is incredibly important. Again, if it's online, it's hard to judge some of those things. And that brings me to another point, which is there's a lot out there that is in person, that is face to face, where you get a vibe for people. You can go to public events of a group, or you can meet some people in the group at least, and have a sense that it's not creepy, or it's not um, predatory in some way, and or too cult like, or whatever, all the kinds of alarm bells that could potentially go off for somebody. Um, so those are the things that immediately come to mind on that question.
Yeah, those are fantastic points. And as I was listening to your response, I'm thinking this is not just Thelemic spaces. I mean, this could
Oh
really
yeah.
apply to pagans, witches. I mean, anyone who's looking for guidance in a tradition. I mean, this is
Mhm.
great stuff.
Yeah, and in my speaking to it, I certainly wasn't only thinking of Thelemic traditions either. I mean, we've all existed in enough different zones of life to see that this can happen, outside of this channel.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm.
So, when people talk about the OTO, they often emphasize the fact the OTO is not a teaching order. In your book, you disagree with this, which I really liked. People are not assigned a teacher in the OTO like they are in the AA, but you can make the argument that it does impart lessons through rituals, classes, and initiations. Do you think this type of unstructured learning could be more difficult with someone with ADHD, for example? And what are some of the signs to look out for if someone could benefit from a more structured learning environment like TOTS or the AA?
Great question. TOTS, shorthand for Temple of the Silver
Yeah.
Star, for listeners. Um, I use it every day and sometimes forget that not everyone in the world knows what
Yeah, I just assume
it
everyone knows everything, but you're
is.
right.
Right. Um, so I mean, the reality, of course, is that if someone's challenged with ADHD or some other similar condition, attention and concentration are part of the issue that may be a concern regardless of the format one's working in. So you could have a very structured format and still have that as a challenge. So I think more broadly, I don't think that should be the deciding. If someone knows they have ADHD as an example, I don't know that by itself is a thing that should say, oh, definitely let's not do an unstructured situation. Let's definitely do a structured order. There's too many other factors. But one thing I've noticed is I've certainly known people with ADHD, and I'll just stick with that as an example to talk about since that's in your question. But I've certainly known people succeed to a great degree in these organizations with ADHD, or clinical depressive cycles, or bipolar conditions. I've seen people with psychotic disorders do well. It's all about self care and management, you know. Um, and knowing how to take care of yourself, knowing how at the human, physiological, psychological level to just be okay day to day, as much as possible, which is something we all struggle with. And I don't mean to overemphasize diagnostic categories either. I'm just giving some examples of the kinds of things that people struggle with. And so I think all of those are not obstacles, are not insurmountable obstacles to the work. For many people, the solace and relaxation and peace that can come from pursuing a spiritual tradition is very healing and curative and calming. Meditative techniques are often helpful in my experience for those challenged with attention or concentration issues. That's one of the things that's trainable. And I mostly just want to not encourage people to not be discouraged by anything that they find as a personal challenge, as if that rules them out of doing the work, whether it's in a less structured setting in terms of the training rigor, or something more structured.
Yeah, I love hearing that so much because I think a lot of people may look in this from the outside, especially new people, like, wow, this is so much, it's overwhelming. I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm not good enough. And I
Mm,
love hearing that there is ways to overcome a lot of different challenges, disabilities, even the
mm,
clinical stuff. I mean, there are tools, resources, and help, and people rooting for you to pursue it
yes,
should you desire and wish to do so.
of course. Yeah. Yeah. Well said.
In the book, you talk about doing a magical retirement at a Thelemic temple in California, and your air mattress kept deflating. So, for
Mhm.
people who don't know, what is a magical retirement, and was that deflating mattress situation something you eventually fixed during your retirement, or did you just accept it and sleep on the floor? I had to ask this question.
Yeah. You're the first person to pin me down on the air mattress issue, so I appreciate it. Um, well, many things can serve as alarm clocks, and one of them is your butt hitting a cold floor in December,
That's amazing.
through a deflating air mattress. So that was all right. I coped with that. A magical retirement is one traditional method of having a focused, intensified period of time where you are um, typically bringing, um, well, I won't say typically, but very often, at least in the case of this kind of retirement we're discussing that I did in 2004, you're bringing a long process to a climax, an intensified, focused climax of invocations, in this case of the Holy Guardian Angel, which we can talk about as a concept also if you want to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, but the intention is to have silence and solitude. And believe it or not, in today's world, that means you don't have electronic contact with anyone. You actually are in solitude, and the outer life is taken care of. You can focus just on what you're doing. I I can't emphasize enough how important I think this can be for someone's just development as a human to have that kind of off the grid experience. Um, but in terms of the magical purpose of it, being able to focus entirely on the invocations you're doing, on the rhythms of daily ritual, on focused study, on note taking on your experiences. So you see retirements prescribed for things like the climax of the Holy Guardian Angel working, but also often in some traditions like AA and elsewhere, periods of time leading up to an initiatory experience where you want to have some seclusion, and maybe there's some personal work that has to be done as a part of the prep process leading up to the initiation. So for that purpose, you need a space that you can kind of live in, set aside. And so I found that the space in Sacramento, which was being built as a Thelemic temple, it just wasn't finished yet, including having a real bed in it, with with a warm floor, um, and insulation and things like that. Um, but it definitely served its purpose, and I've walked into that building many times in the last 20 years and stood in the spot where that experience climaxed in 2004, and the energy is still there for me. It's still being used as the Thelemic temple, so that's nice.
That's beautiful. Yeah, and you did mention the Holy Guardian Angel. How would you define the Holy Guardian Angel, and how is it important to the work of Thelema practitioners in general? I do want to take a detour to talk about that for our
Yeah.
listeners also.
So the Holy Guardian Angel is the term that Crowley suggested we use, and used himself over and over for the the uh, the climactic, ecstatic, spiritual awakening that doesn't need a label but needs one so we can talk about it. So it's been called things like Goedes, the higher self, the holy guardian angel, God, uh, you know, Christ consciousness has been called everything. But the point is, when you walk a path to through a set of tools and landmarks that tend to be demonstrably helpful, as in systems like AA and TOTS, um, things tend to be put in place so that you get your head in the right place to hear the voice that has been trying to speak to you your whole life, and it is the voice of deep spiritual conscience that many perceive, including myself, as coming from outside oneself. This isn't just a part of the brain or the higher self in the sense of something we've known as ourselves. This is communication between the aspirant and divinity itself personified, well, it specified for the aspirant themselves. So it's sort of the idea of a personal God that's just yours. Okay. Probably the easiest way to explain that part of it. But once we've made that linkage, which in AA is characteristic of a certain grade called Adeptus Minor, once we made that linkage, the knowledge of our true will is much more conscious and complete than it could have been before. The knowledge of our basic nature, our reason for incarnation, what it is that we are here to contribute to humanity, we get much more clarity on that. Also, making that linkage, as you might expect with an attainment like that, changes our perspectives on what the everyday human ego personality is. Whereas we might have previously seen it as me, this is the center of me. It's just I get up and I go to work and I, have my friends and I drink my coffee and all of that. But what if we have an experience that shows us that that is just a corner of what we are as a divine human? Okay. And it's like pulling back the camera and seeing all of that stuff in our lives that we thought of as the totality of ourselves as sort of like, oh, look at that cute pet I have. Look at that. Look, it's sad. Let's take care of it. And when you start to treat your ego and your personality as something that you care for and use as a tool in the world, but it's not the center of you, that is a cataclysmic change of awareness and consciousness. And that's one of the other effects of knowledge and conversation that many people would report. But the key thing in the Thelemic tradition is that knowledge and conversation is the term for that awareness, that attainment. Knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel brings awareness of true will in a more direct way. And that is the whole point of the tradition of Thelema, of course, is finding our true will and finding a way to live that out in the world that is as effective and efficient and passionate and joyous as we can make it.
Wonderful and beautifully put. Great. Yeah, it makes me really reflect on the people who, well, I mean, that was myself one day, in the past. I was thinking about like, I felt so lost in the world and I was really looking to know myself better. I was looking to know my path, what I wanted to do with my career, all of these questions. And I really returned back to this idea of, came up with from Aleister Crowley of true will. And the work around the Holy Guardian Angel. And so I love hearing you talk about it because it's so well put. And I think it's a tangible result and a direction that a lot of people could be seeking and get a lot of benefit from.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think actually, believe it or not, in spite of Crowley's focus on it, in my time in Thelema, it's odd to me how sometimes there is so little focus on that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the central thing that we're supposed to be aiming at from walking in the door as a magical aspirant. If you take Crowley's word for it, that the whole point of the evolution of humanity, the whole point of what we're doing now in this aeon of Horus, is to help everyone in humanity kind of reach that threshold of knowledge and conversation. But sometimes people get bogged down or distracted by the tools that can help with that. So any magical practice, any meditative practice, any worship of any deity in any tradition, according to Crowley in this sort of AA framework, is just essentially practice of tools that can eventually perform the only invocation that really matters, which is one's holy guardian angel. So enjoy intercourse with spirits of all kinds, and I mean that the small I intercourse.
People are going
And
to hear that and interpret it a bunch of ways, but
yeah, quote me out of context, please, on that. It's happened before. Um, so people will use all kinds of tools, and that's great. And they'll experiment with the different traditions, and that's great. And different, whether it's Goetia or more traditional Solomonic techniques or Enochian or whatever. But all of those things are designed to be used as pieces of the work to attain knowledge and conversation, at least speaking in terms of Crowley's view within AA. All those are tools, not ends unto themselves. And once one has full awareness of true will, according to the magical theory that Crowley has, then we're able to use those tools with maximum efficiency because we're not swimming upstream against what the universe wants. We know more about who we are, therefore we know what the universe wants for us to be doing. Therefore, our magical choices in terms of what kind of ritual we're going to do, what the magical aims we're going to select are going to be in line with that. So instead of, again, trying to sort of go against the current and make this thing happen through magical effort that isn't really in accord with our will, we're doing something where we have the help, the momentum of the whole universe with us. And so that's so key to understanding why the true will is such an important ingredient in doing powerful magic. And Crowley makes this point time and time again in places like the Introduction to Magic and Theory and Practice.
yeah, wonderful points. And one thing that makes this book really stand out from other Thelemic books out there is the inclusion of Kabbalistic psychology. So, how would you describe Kabbalistic psychology to someone who has never heard it before, and why is it important?
Kabbalistic psychology, I've been thinking a lot about this because of the book and talking about the book lately. Your listeners might have figured out I've been thinking a lot about it since I just wrote a book about it, but so that's a bit of a redundant point. But how to explain it simply is what I've been thinking more about. And I think the best way to see it is the way that the system of Kabbalah itself envisions the interplay of the parts of the human soul and the divine, which are one. So it's a map and a sort of a working functional description of the way that our subconscious and our sort of animal self interacts with our everyday human ego, interacts with the divine spark within ourselves, the super consciousness. And since it's framed and interlaced with the tree of life, it's a way of understanding our human psyche that matches with and syncs with our initiatory path and our way of understanding how the universe is built. And so it's kind of a theory of everything in that sense, that just happens to be one of the most nuanced psychological theories of personality and psyche that I've ever seen, including all of my formal training. So that's why it's so important to me personally, is that it's the best description of human functioning that I've seen anywhere. And it happens to be a very old one, you know. It's not some new superimposition on older Kabbalistic traditions. I mean, obviously, I'm a modern psychologist talking about it, so I'm superimposing some stuff, but the system itself is embedded in the way Kabbalists traditionally have understood the human experience and its interface with the divine.
And this topic is something that you rarely see talked about. So it was a real treat to see it in The Way of the Will. And that's something for people who are looking to expand their knowledge of Thelema can come to and really get a lot out of, I think. And I also heard you did an interview with Harper that talks way in depth about this. So I definitely want to tell our viewers and listeners to go check that out. and hear some more about that from that interview. So, what other projects do you have on your horizon to look forward to and that you're excited about?
Many. Let's see. So, in an ongoing way, my project is always teaching and helping people in organizations that I'm overseeing. So, Temple of the Silver Star, TOTSS.org, is an ongoing concern every day. I'm always working, and we have initiates, wonderful people all around the world meeting and doing their work. NAA, onestarinsight.org. We have similarly vibrant work happening all around the world, and I'm helping people day to day with that. So that's a very big part of my everyday experience. I mean, I'm spending several hours a day helping folks with that on the individual or group level. Pull back the camera a little bit. I got some public appearances coming up. June 30 in Tacoma being the next one, I believe. But Thelemicon is a big thing on the horizon. That is a Thelemic conference open to the public. You don't have to belong to any particular organization. You could have never belonged to an organization. You can be a beginner. You can be more advanced. This is a place to come together and hear some very experienced speakers and have some fellowship and community with other seekers. So this is happening in Raleigh, North Carolina, and online. It's sort of a hybrid conference, October 4, 5, 6 this year. So very excited about that. It's the fourth time we've done it, and since 2019. So that's one of the brighter beacons on the horizon in the fall.
Yeah, and I will be there. I've been to a Thelemicon in the past, and it was an amazing experience. I really enjoyed the in-person lectures as well as some practical demonstrations. And of course, there's a lot of networking and community building happening. So that's
Yeah.
definitely something to check out. And if you can make it in person, it's definitely worth it. But if not, there is the online option. So where can people find you if they're interested in following your work?
Okay, so I dropped some names and links in that last answer, but Temple of the Silver Star is TOTSS.org, AA is onestarinsight.org, Thelemic is thelemic.org. My archive of Living Thelema podcast episodes is a couple places on livingthelema.com and also on the Living Thelema YouTube channel. And since I often am working with people in my psychotherapy and personal coaching practice who are Thelemic or pagan leaning in some way, Wiccan, that's something that sometimes people value, having a therapist or a coach who has a similar worldview like that. So my professional website is dr-shoemaker.com. If anyone wants to contact me that way. I should emphasize though that I don't ever if I'm working with someone as a magical student, for example, I would never take them as a therapy or coaching client, because I feel I'd like to keep those streams separate, and wouldn't want one role to unduly influence the other. So when I talk about my therapy and coaching practice, after all this other organizational discussion, I want to make sure people know that that's not, you don't come into a group I'm administering and you're not expected to be a client of mine or something in therapy. I keep those roles very separate. And if someone was working with me in therapy or coaching and wanted to join one of the groups I administer, we'd need to stop the therapy or coaching relationship so that could still be separate. So don't want to throw in the small lawyer print all at the end here, but that's basically just a way of emphasizing I like to keep those streams separate and but given that, do want people to know that I'm out there for those therapy and coaching services too.
Wonderful. And thank you so very much for joining me today, David. And thank you so much to all of our viewers and listeners. It's been an absolute treat. All of the links he mentioned are going to be down below in the description so you can find them easily. And as always, thank you for joining me today. I am the Center of Expression for the Primal Will to Good, and so are you. Thanks, everyone.